Before we dive into creating complex repeating patterns, I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the design process for how to create a simple, basic, straight repeating pattern in Illustrator for anybody who may need a refresher, or if you are new to the process and you're diving into this course for the first time. That said, do remember that in Pattern Camp Level 1, another Skillshare class that I've got available, I go into this process in a lot of detail and a lot of different ways. So definitely go back to that one if you haven't checked it out yet. But in this course, we'll do just a quick overview since we'll be diving into some more advanced techniques and different kinds of repeats and that kind of thing. So let's get started. So I've created a file here that is 8 by 8 inches. That's kind of my standard artboard size. Yours doesn't have to be that size. It can be whatever you choose, but 8 by 8 I feel like is a nice size to work with. So I've got that created, and I chose some colors already for my color palette that I'll be working with. And I'm going to bring in, I have some sketches here that I've already image traced or scanned and image traced and brought into Illustrator. And again, I go into a lot of detail in Pattern Camp Level 1 about how and why to do that. So go back to that if you have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to choose one motif here, and I'm going to copy it and paste it over. So for our purposes, I'm just going to show you, again, as a quick refresher, how to make a straight repeat using just this one floral motif. So the first thing that I'll do is move this off to the side, and then I'm going to make my background square. So you'll just want to line it up in the top left corner, click once. This is with my rectangle tool selected, and make that square the same size as my artboard, which is 8 by 8, and click OK. So it made it white. I don't really want my background to be white, so I'm going to choose one of these colors from my color palette, which I've already brought over here into my swatches palette. And if that's not open for you for whatever reason, you can get to that in the window menu here. So I'm going to make my background this kind of light turquoise color. And then it looks like that is behind my square, so I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front to bring that up so I can see it again. And I can change the color of that either by selecting my motif and simply clicking on any of these colors over in my color palette, or I can use my paint bucket tool, which if you can't see that in your tool palette, it is nested under the shape builder tool. It's a little bit tricky and confusing to find it if you don't know where it is to begin with, but it's under the shape builder tool here. You can just click and hold and then select that one instead. So I've turned this shape into a live paint area already, and again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I go into a lot of detail in Pattern Camp Level 1 about how and why to do this, so you can go back and check that out for all those details. So I can simply choose colors here, and once it's highlighted here, that tells me that that's the area that I'm about to fill. So I can just use my paint bucket tool to go around and fill all of those areas. In my opinion, it's kind of easier just to select it and choose a color from here, but it depends on what feels easier and more appropriate for you. So what I'm going to do next is just copy and paste this motif, this design, a bunch of times to fill up my squares. So I tend to start in the top left corner when I'm designing, because everything that's here on the left edge is going to need to overlap on the right edge, and everything that's at the top will need to overlap on the bottom, all in exactly the same spot on each side and each edge. So I like to stay away from the right edge and the bottom edge for now, and I kind of work my way diagonally down, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to hold down my Option key, and you'll see that makes this little double arrow show up. And if I hold it down and click, hold, and drag, that is an easy way to copy. You can also, of course, just go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste, and that will make a new copy. There are always a couple of ways to do things in Illustrator, so I'm just going to do the keyboard shortcut easy way and hold down my Option key, click, hold, and drag. Simple, simple. And in Pattern Camp Level 1, I showed you a bunch of different ways that you can just make this look a little more visually interesting with a couple of really simple tricks. Like, for example, what I'm doing now is just rotating these so they're not all in exactly the same direction, which just makes, adds a little bit of visual interest. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and keep clicking, and I'll make some more overlap these edges here. And if I just hover over this corner without holding down any keys, you'll see that little curvy arrow show up, and that means I can rotate. There's also the rotate tool over here in the tool palette, so if you select that, you don't have to wait for that curvy arrow to show up. It's just when you click, hold, and drag, it will rotate it automatically. Okay, so you'll see I have a couple of things overlapping on the left and a couple of things overlapping on the top and one thing overlapping in the corner. So now that my square is getting to be kind of full, you can always adjust where these are later, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to select everything over on my left edge. Oops, first I'm going to lock this, so I'm going to go to Object, Lock Selection, because you don't want your background to move. So again, I'll click, hold, and drag. This is with my black arrow tool selected to select everything that's overlapping on the left edge here. And when I double click on my black arrow tool, my selection tool, this move panel shows up, which is one of the most handy things that you can use or that you will use in designing patterns. I use this all the time to make sure that everything is moved into precisely the exact position I want it to be. So my artboard is 8 by 8 inches, so to move things over to the right, we're going to be moving horizontally, but not at all vertically. So we'll be going 8 inches horizontally to the right, 0 vertically, and copy. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on the top. So I'll select everything that's overlapping on the top. So you'll see now I've got the 2 top corners. You'll want to make sure that both of those are selected. And we'll do the same thing, double click on the black arrow tool, and this time we're not moving horizontally at all, so that number will be 0. Vertically, we'll be moving down 8 inches, and we'll copy that. There we go. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, that repeat will work properly. It doesn't look great. Some of these things will have to be moved around. And another trick that I like to use is to hold down my Shift key, and I can scale things up or down, just again to add a little bit more visual interest, a little bit of difference between motifs. And you'll want to remember that if you change anything that's overlapping an edge, like for example, I just changed this one on the left, but this one is not corresponding because I only changed the one, I'll need to delete that one, copy this one over to the right again, so 8 inches horizontally, vertically 0, and copy. And now it'll work properly again. So just remember as you're moving things around and testing your repeat that if it doesn't work and things look a little bit cut off or strange for some reason, that might be why. Okay, so there's our basic repeat. It's not going to be the most beautiful, but it's going to work, and that's what's most important in this lesson. So the next step will be to unlock the background and select it, and then we're going to copy, paste in back. So now we have a copy of this turquoise square that's all the way in the back. This is the most important step. If you don't do this step, your pattern will not work. So that back square, the one at the very back or the very bottom of your stack, is selected and it's still turquoise. You want this square to be blank, 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 totally blank. So you want your fill here to have no fill, transparent. You want your stroke here to be transparent also, no stroke, no color at all. And that's that. So again, that is the most important step in your pattern design process, aside from making sure everything is lined up properly, of course, is making sure that that magic background square is there. Otherwise, your pattern will not work. Okay, so let's make this pattern swatch. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag with my black arrow tool selected and select everything in my pattern tile. This is your pattern tile. And there are 2 different ways that you can do this, which I'll show you. The first way is the manual way, which is the way that I learned to do it and the way that I still do it to this day. So with everything selected, I will click, hold, and just simply drag this over to my swatches palette. And you'll see that little green plus sign. That means it's about to be added. And when I let go, you'll see that pattern swatch is there. And if I hover over it, it says new pattern swatch 1. Okay, so the second method is with everything selected, I can go to Object, Pattern, Make, and you'll see this kind of crazy looking preview show up. There we go. Took its time there. And this can be really confusing if you don't know what's happening. So basically in a straight repeat, the way that this pattern options panel shows up is essentially how you're going to leave it. You don't need to mess with the tile type. You don't need to really mess with anything. All you need to know is that these buttons up here are the most important. So when you click done, this crazy looking, like kind of grayed out preview of your pattern and this strange shifting that it did will go away. And over here, your pattern swatch will be created. So I'm going to go ahead and click done. And you can see new pattern. So I'm going to use my grabber hand to shift over here and I'll show you how these patterns are repeating. So we'll make a big square, say 20 by 20 inches, click OK, zoom out a little, and then I'm just going to fill it with my pattern swatches that I made. So this is the first one, done manually. This is the second one, done with the pattern Object Pattern Make tool, the pattern tool. They are pretty much exactly the same. One of those is a little bit darker for some reason. I'm not sure why, but both of those processes will work. So whichever way feels easier to you, it's totally fine and appropriate. So going back, there is our pattern tile. Everything is overlapping properly on the edges. My blank magic square is all the way at the back or the bottom of my stack. And to save this, I would simply go to File, Save, or Save As, given a name. I always save my .ai files, so you'll see when I do Save As, I've already named mine, but you can name yours whatever you want. And then it's got this .ai. That's really important. That's your working pattern file. So if you ever wanted to go back and change the colors or create a smaller version or anything like that you wanted to edit this pattern, this is the file that you would use. You can also export different file types from here by going to File, Export, Export As, all of these different options, JPEG, PNG, a TIFF file, whatever you might need, and then save that. But always, always, always remember to save your AI file, your Illustrator working file. And it's taking its time. So that is the basic process that we're going to be using in this course. Getting more complex with layers and textures and that kind of thing, and then also talking about half drop repeats, which work kind of in the same way and kind of not in the same way. So stay tuned in a lesson to come for that. And I hope this refresher was helpful. And again, if that didn't make sense, or if you just want to know a bit more about how this works, why this works, different ways that you can make this work, check out Pattern Camp Level 1, another class here on Skillshare. And that should get you all set up for working through this course here.